Evelyn adjusted the strap of her worn canvas tote as she walked through the sliding doors of the grocery store. The cool blast of air conditioning greeted her like an old friend. This place had become a second home in its own way, not because she loved shopping, but because it was part of the rhythm of her life. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., without fail. She liked knowing what to expect, even if it meant her days bled together in their sameness. At 52, Evelyn's life had become a study in quiet solitude. Her 2 children were grown and scattered across the country, and her marriage of 27 years had dissolved amicably but painfully 5 years ago. She had traded the bustle of family life for a quieter existence in a small, cozy apartment on the edge of town. Her days were marked by work, evening walks, and the occasional phone call from her daughter. It wasn't that she was unhappy. Content might have been a better word, but she sometimes wondered if there was more to life than the steady hum of routine. That Tuesday, as she reached for a loaf of sourdough in the bakery section, her hand brushed against another. Startled, she looked up, and there he was, a man in his late 20s or early 30s, with dark, slightly disheveled hair and a shy, apologetic smile. "Sorry about that," he said, pulling his hand back and letting out a soft laugh. "Looks like we've got the same taste in bread." Evelyn managed a small smile. "No harm done. It's a popular choice, I suppose." He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to say more, and then added, "It's the only thing that makes my attempts at cooking remotely edible." She laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly. "Well, at least you're trying. That's more than most can say." The moment lingered, neither of them quite ready to move on. He extended his hand, still holding a paper bag of rolls. "I'm Leo." "Evelyn," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and oddly grounding. They chatted briefly, about bread of all things, and then went their separate ways. But as Evelyn moved through the store, she caught sight of him again and again, in the produce aisle, examining a carton of eggs, and finally at the self-checkout, where he struggled to scan a stubborn barcode. Each time, he smiled at her as if they were old friends, and each time, her heart lifted in a way she hadn't felt in years. As she walked to her car, her mind kept returning to his smile, his easy laugh. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he undeniably was. It was the way he had turned a mundane Tuesday into something unexpected, something bright. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, something more than contentment. Something she thought she might have lost forever. Over the following weeks, Evelyn found herself looking forward to her Tuesday grocery trips in a way she never had before. She told herself it was silly. After all, the odds of seeing him again were slim. People didn't schedule their lives around bread and eggs. And yet, part of her couldn't help but hope. Then, one Tuesday, there he was, standing by the deli counter. Leo. He noticed her almost immediately and broke into a grin that warmed her chest. "Evelyn!" he called, his voice carrying above the clatter of the store. "Fancy meeting you here again." She chuckled, her cheeks flushing in spite of herself. "I might say the same about you." "Well, I'm trying to improve my cooking, and this store has the best bread," he said with a wink, holding up a baguette as evidence. They fell into easy conversation, first about groceries and then about life. He told her about his job as a graphic designer, how he worked freelance, and often found himself stuck in front of a computer for hours on end. Evelyn shared that she worked part-time at the local library, a job she had taken after her divorce to fill her days. "That sounds like a dream," Leo said, his tone genuine. "Being surrounded by books all day? I'd probably never leave." "It has its charms," Evelyn admitted, "though it's mostly cataloging and answering questions about overdue fines." They laughed together, their voices blending into the hum of the store. Before parting, Leo hesitated, then asked, "Would it be too forward to ask if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime? I mean, we're clearly destined to keep meeting here." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her for coffee, let alone someone as vibrant and warm as Leo. For a brief moment, the cautious part of her wanted to decline, but something deeper, a quiet yearning, urged her to say yes. "I think I'd like that," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. They exchanged phone numbers, and Evelyn spent the rest of the day replaying their conversation in her mind. She told herself it was nothing more than a budding friendship, He was young, charming, and kind. Perhaps he simply saw her as someone interesting to talk to. But even so, she couldn't ignore the spark of joy he had brought into her life. When they met for coffee later that week, their connection deepened. Leo spoke passionately about his work, his favorite books, and his dreams of traveling to Europe someday. Evelyn found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years, sharing stories from her past, her favorite poetry, and the small joys that made up her quiet life. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Evelyn felt a lightness she hadn't known she was missing, a sense of being truly seen. By the time they parted, she realized something profound. For the first time in years, she was excited for what tomorrow might bring. Their friendship unfolded like the chapters of a well-worn novel, familiar, yet thrilling in its surprises. Weekly coffee dates turned into impromptu walks in the park and long phone calls that stretched late into the evening. Evelyn felt herself laughing more, noticing the little things around her, and looking forward to the sound of her phone chiming with a message from Leo. Yet, beneath the joy lay an undercurrent of confusion and unease she couldn't ignore. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs at her dining table, Evelyn's gaze lingered on a picture of her and her ex-husband James. It had been taken on her 40th birthday, their smiles wide, their arms wrapped around each other. She could almost hear the echo of his voice from a time when they were still happy. "Those days are over," she whispered to herself, placing the photo back in its box. Yet, Leo's image rose unbidden in her mind, his laugh, his easy charm, the way his eyes seemed to light up when she spoke. The realization came on a quiet Sunday morning. Evelyn sat by her window, sipping her tea, and replaying her last meeting with Leo in her mind. They had gone to a small art exhibit downtown, where he had stood beside her, studying a painting of a stormy seascape. "It's chaos," he had said, tilting his head. "But there's something beautiful in how the waves keep crashing, no matter what." His words had struck a chord, though Evelyn couldn't say why. That night, as she lay in bed, she understood. She wasn't just grateful for Leo's friendship. She wasn't simply enjoying his company. She cared for him, deeply, inexplicably, and in a way that went beyond what she had ever anticipated. The revelation startled her. It was as though she had been walking through a familiar forest only to stumble upon an unexpected clearing, the sunlight almost too bright to bear. How could this be? She wondered. He was young, full of life, with a world of possibilities ahead of him. What could he possibly see in her? The thought brought a pang of fear, an ache that she couldn't place. The age gap was impossible to ignore. The world didn't look kindly on women her age harboring feelings for younger men. Society expected her to fade quietly into the background, to accept the role of a mentor or friend, never a romantic interest. The idea of challenging that unspoken rule made her stomach churn. But as much as she tried to reason herself out of it, her feelings wouldn't be silenced. They filled the quiet moments of her day, coloring the world around her in ways she hadn't thought possible. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. It wasn't just about Leo. It was about the way he had awakened something within her, a part of her that had been dormant for so long she had nearly forgotten it existed. Love, hope, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of something more. And for the first time in years, Evelyn found herself yearning for the chaos of crashing waves. Evelyn tried to push her feelings aside, to bury them beneath the demands of daily life. But they refused to stay hidden. Leo's messages still brought a smile to her face. His laughter still warmed the spaces in her heart she thought had grown cold. Her emotions churned like a restless sea. One moment, she felt giddy, as though the world had suddenly become brighter, more alive. The next, guilt crept in, whispering doubts and fears that left her chest heavy. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in her hands. Her phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Hey, Evelyn. Just saw the most incredible sunset. It made me think of that painting we talked about. Hope you're having a good evening, smiley face." She stared at the screen, her heart aching with both longing and trepidation. The world had conditioned her to believe that at her age, love was a fleeting memory, not a future possibility. And yet here she was, caught in the throes of something she couldn't fully understand or control. Her daughters had called earlier that day, their voices full of cheerful updates about their lives. Neither of them could have imagined their mother's quiet struggle, the way she wrestled with a hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. What would they think if they knew? Evelyn's mind swirled with imagined scenarios: disapproval, confusion, or even pity. The thought of being judged, especially by her own family, gnawed at her. Worse still was the uncertainty surrounding Leo's intentions. To him, she might be nothing more than a kind companion, someone he enjoyed talking to. He had never given her any indication otherwise, had he? Evelyn replayed their conversations, searching for signs she might have missed. A lingering glance, a meaningful pause in his words. Were they real, or was she simply seeing what she wanted to see? The days that followed were a blur of doubt and introspection. She avoided making plans with Leo, claiming she was busy, though the truth was far more complicated. She needed time to think, to decide if she was brave enough to face what her heart was urging her toward. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn found herself wandering through the park near her home. The air was cool and damp, the sky a dull gray, but the solitude gave her a rare sense of clarity. She thought of the moments she had spent with Leo, the way he listened intently, the way he made her feel valued and alive. Her feelings weren't a betrayal of her age or her past. They were a testament to her humanity. And yet, the thought of acting on them felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if the leap would lead to flight or to a devastating fall. As she reached a bench overlooking the small pond, Evelyn sat down, letting the rain fall lightly on her face. The world was filled with risks and unknowns, she thought. But wasn't it also filled with the potential for beauty, for connection, for love? For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to take the leap, to tell Leo how she felt, to see if he might feel the same. The possibility was terrifying, yes, but also intoxicating in its promise. She left the park that day with a single resolution. She would find out. One way or another, she owed it to herself to know. The result Evelyn found in the park didn't make her task any easier. Each day brought a new wave of doubt, of excuses to retreat into the comfort of avoidance. But deep down, she knew she couldn't stay in limbo forever. The moment presented itself one Saturday afternoon when Leo called. His voice was bright as he told her about a new recipe he wanted to try, a mushroom risotto he'd seen in a cooking show. "You're the only person I know who might appreciate it," he teased. "Everyone else I know just wants pizza." Evelyn laughed, but her heart raced. This was her chance. The words sat on the tip of her tongue, fragile and uncertain. "Why don't you bring the ingredients here?" she blurted before she could lose her nerve. "We could try it together." A pause. She held her breath, wondering if she had gone too far. "That sounds great," Leo said, his voice warm with enthusiasm. "What time should I come by?" Her stomach fluttered. 6, she suggested, trying to sound casual despite the chaos in her chest. "Perfect. I'll see you then," he said, and the call ended. The moment the line went silent, Evelyn's composure crumbled. She set her phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at it as if it were a portal to another world. She had done it. She had invited him over. The hours that followed were a flurry of preparation and self-doubt. She cleaned her home meticulously, agonizing over every detail. The flowers on the dining table were rearranged 3 times before she was satisfied. She debated endlessly over what to wear, finally settling on a soft gray sweater and a pair of jeans. Casual but not too casual. Comfortable but presentable. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, she was a bundle of nerves. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath, smoothing her hair before opening the door. Leo stood there with a bag of groceries in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, his smile as disarming as ever. "Hope you're ready for a culinary adventure," he joked, stepping inside. Evelyn couldn't help but smile back, her nerves easing just slightly. As they unpacked the ingredients together, the atmosphere between them was easy, as it always had been. But this time, there was something different, an undercurrent of possibility that hadn't been there before. The evening unfolded in a blur of laughter and shared effort. They chopped onions side by side, debated over how much garlic was too much, and marveled at the rich aroma of the risotto as it cooked. At one point, Leo flicked a small splash of wine in her direction, and Evelyn retaliated with a playful swipe of her dish towel. When they finally sat down to eat, the conversation flowed as effortlessly as the wine. They talked about their favorite childhood meals, their most memorable cooking disasters, and their dreams for the future. Evelyn found herself captivated by the way Leo spoke, his passion and optimism shining through in every word. As the evening wore on, the room seemed to grow warmer, the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows on the walls. Evelyn felt a shift, subtle but undeniable, a sense that this moment, this connection, was something extraordinary. And as Leo reached across the table to refill her glass, his hand brushing hers for the briefest of moments, she wondered if he felt it too. The evening unfolded in a haze of laughter, clinking glasses, and the comforting warmth of shared space. As they ate, the conversation became more intimate, their topics shifting from the safe territory of food and past experiences to more vulnerable territories. Evelyn watched Leo closely, her heart both racing and calming with every word he spoke. He was so full of life, so unafraid of the world, while she was still learning to shed the layers of self-doubt and fear that had accumulated over the years. His eyes sparkled as he spoke about a trip he had taken to Italy, how the air there had tasted different, how the food was so fresh it seemed to come alive with every bite. "That sounds like a dream," Evelyn said softly, smiling at the way he painted pictures with his words. "I haven't really traveled much. Just ordinary places." "Ordinary doesn't have to mean boring," Leo replied, his voice gentle. "Sometimes, the best stories come from the simplest moments." Evelyn smiled at him, feeling something stir within her. He was right. She had spent years chasing the notion of what her life should be, but maybe it was time to embrace the beauty of the ordinary. Maybe the simplicity of this moment, sitting at her kitchen table, sharing a meal with a man who made her feel like her life was just beginning, was exactly what she needed. As they finished their meal, Leo insisted on cleaning up, and Evelyn let him, though part of her wanted to keep him near. She found herself lingering in the living room, waiting for him to join her again, unsure of what to do with the gentle tension that hung between them. When he returned, they sat on the couch, their bodies not quite touching but close enough that Evelyn could feel the heat of his presence. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but filled with something unspoken, something that neither of them had yet named. "I'm glad we did this," Leo said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm not usually this spontaneous, but I'm really glad you invited me over." Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. There it was, the unspoken truth between them. She could feel it now, like a thread drawing them closer together. It wasn't just the meal, or the wine, or the laughter. It was something deeper, something that had been growing between them for weeks, maybe longer. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something she hadn't dared admit to herself until now. She was not just enjoying his company, she was falling for him. The thought sent a jolt of warmth through her, followed by a wave of anxiety. Could she really be feeling this way? Was it even possible to feel so alive after so many years of solitude? Leo shifted closer, his hand brushing against hers as he reached for the remote. It was a casual gesture, but it felt charged, as though every movement between them now held meaning. Evelyn's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she glanced down at their hands. And then in that quiet, intimate space, Leo looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. It was a soft, knowing smile, the kind that seemed to say everything that words could not. "I'm glad you're here," he whispered. His voice was low, intimate, and Evelyn felt the words reverberate inside her chest. In that moment, everything in her, everything that had been holding her back, melted away. She didn't have the answers yet, didn't know where this connection would lead. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to let herself feel. Evelyn reached for his hand, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they intertwined. And for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of them, caught in a delicate, beautiful moment of possibility. Evelyn sat alone in the quiet of her living room after Leo had left, her thoughts swirling in a kaleidoscope of emotions. Her fingers still tingled from the touch of his hand, and the warmth of the evening lingered like a soft embrace. The memory of their time together played in her mind, each moment more precious than the last. She found herself smiling, almost unable to believe that something so simple, so tender, could feel so profound. She had always believed that love was something that belonged to the young, that the flame of passion burned brightly in youth and flickered out with time. She had grown accustomed to her solitude, to the quiet hum of her daily routine. Years had passed since she had last allowed herself to dream of love, and even longer since she had entertained the possibility that someone might look at her with the kind of admiration Leo had shown. But in his eyes, she saw something different. It wasn't just admiration, it was a connection, a spark. And she couldn't deny it anymore, not after the way he made her feel, alive, wanted, seen. Yet the doubt crept in, as it always did. How could this be real? What could a man in his 20s possibly want with a woman like her? Her mind wandered to the inevitable questions, the judgment, the whispered conversations, the raised eyebrows. Society had its own rules, its own definitions of what was acceptable, and they rarely included a woman of her age pursuing a romance with a younger man. But Leo had never treated her like she was an anomaly. He saw her, really saw her, and that realization made her heart swell with a mixture of joy and fear. She stood by the window, gazing out at the night sky, the stars sparkling above like tiny promises of hope. Leo had shown her that love wasn't just a young person's game. Love was a choice. It was about finding someone who made you feel whole, who made you feel like you were worthy of all the tenderness life had to offer, no matter the years between you. But there was still fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of how others might react. Fear of getting hurt. Could she really risk her heart, at this stage in her life, for something so uncertain? Evelyn let out a slow breath, her fingers tracing the edge of the windowsill. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to think about what she wanted, not what was expected of her, not what was socially acceptable, but what she wanted. And what she wanted, she realized, was Leo. She wanted his laughter, his energy, his warmth. She wanted the feeling of being cherished, of feeling like the most important person in the room when he looked at her. She wanted to feel the same excitement in her heart that she had felt when they first met, that fluttering sense of possibility. Her thoughts began to settle, the uncertainty dissolving into clarity. Age, she realized, was nothing more than a number. It didn't define the depth of connection she could share with another person. Love had no expiration date, no rule book, no right or wrong way to exist. If she was brave enough to acknowledge her feelings, to step into the unknown, maybe she could have something beautiful with Leo. Maybe they could create their own story, free from the constraints of what others thought was possible. With a quiet resolve, Evelyn made a decision. She wasn't going to let the fear of judgment or the weight of societal norms dictate her future. She would embrace this connection, this unexpected love, and let it unfold however it was meant to. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt certain about something. That love, true love, could come at any stage of life, and it was never too late to let it change everything. The following weeks were a delicate dance of shared moments, new experiences, and the quiet unfolding of a connection that felt as though it had been waiting for both of them all their lives. Evelyn and Leo continued to meet, their bond deepening in ways that felt natural yet profound. They spent afternoons walking through the park, talking about everything and nothing, about books they loved, dreams they had, and the small, beautiful details of everyday life. They laughed easily, as though the years between them had melted away, leaving only the raw, beautiful honesty of two people who had found something rare in each other. For Evelyn, the greatest surprise wasn't just in the joy Leo brought into her life, it was in how it made her see herself differently. She was no longer just a woman in her 50s, someone who had lived a quiet, predictable life. She was someone who could still be desired, who could still feel the warmth of a love that transcended the boundaries of time. One afternoon, as they sat on her porch, sipping iced tea and watching the world drift by, Leo turned to her, his eyes filled with the kind of tenderness that made Evelyn's heart flutter. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I never expected to feel this way. You make me feel like everything is possible." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. It was exactly how she felt. "I never thought I'd feel this way either," she admitted. "But sometimes, love comes when you least expect it. And it doesn't always fit into the boxes we've been taught to put it in." Leo reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I don't care about boxes. I care about us." And in that moment, everything else faded away, the doubt, the fear, the uncertainty. All that remained was the simple truth of what they shared, a love that, despite its unconventional beginning, was as real and deep as anything she had ever known. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need them. What mattered now was the present, the connection they had, and the love they were building together. Age was irrelevant. Society's judgment was irrelevant. What mattered was the way Leo made her feel, alive, cherished, and full of possibility. As she looked up at the sky, the soft hues of twilight beginning to settle around them, Evelyn felt a sense of peace. She had taken a leap, had followed her heart despite the unknown, and in doing so, she had found something beautiful. Love, it seemed, had no expiration date. It was something that could arrive unexpectedly at any age and change everything. And for that, Evelyn was profoundly grateful. In the end, the most important thing was this: to never stop believing in love, to never stop following your heart, no matter the obstacles, no matter the judgments, no matter how many years you've lived. Love, she had learned, was the most powerful force of all, and it was always worth the risk.